And we are now live. Hello, Boston buddies. Welcome to a late edition of brunch for the people in the United States and an actual on-time brunch for people in New Zealand. Today we have Roger Robinson with us. He's an author, speaker, scholar, and a noted runner. So welcome, Roger.
Well, thank you, Vince. I've been a Boston buddy for a year or two, and I've always followed it, and I'm delighted to be part of this.
Oh, we are excited to have you. I think I was telling you earlier, I teased this interview a little bit, and said a little bit about your accomplishments as a runner. People probably didn't realize that you're not just Kathrine Switzer's husband. You were an astonishing runner from the early 60s, 70s, and 80s. You were championship masters runner as well.
Yes, and it goes back as well. It's up to almost 70 years now, I think, of regular running, because I started when I was about 11.
Okay.
And yes, and I ran for, ultimately, I mean, I was never hugely talented, but I ran for England before I left England to move to New Zealand, and then ran for New Zealand, both in the World Cross Country Championships, and then kept going well into the Masters grade. And then, as you said, did some decent performances at 40 and through to 50 before the injuries started coming.
Yeah.
And now I'm currently on, I think it's my 348th comeback from injury.
Sounds like most runners. Right.
But still doing it.
So I do have to ask, I always ask everybody, how are you doing in New Zealand these days with the coronavirus and the lockdown? You guys doing okay?
Yeah, New Zealand is pretty good because they've been sensible over the lockdown rules, and they've actually encouraged people to take exercise, and which is really important. I mean, I think that all the governments that have locked people up in their houses completely have made a big mistake. They should be encouraging people to take exercise, provided you stay near home, you strictly observe social distance, and you don't take any risks. So they banned in the earlier stages, when it was really serious, they banned things like extreme mountain biking, for instance, because of the danger and the call on emergency services. They wanted to keep all medical services focused on the main job. Now all of that's now relaxing. So it's been pretty good. I've been going out and running every day, and I just published an article in Podium Runner about running in the lockdown. And said that in a funny way, it's like being a professional athlete. It's like, because all there is to do is to run and train and sleep.
That's right. That's like
I just said at age 80 the ratio is different. That's all.
That's like what Shalane Flanagan said in that Boston documentary. All we do is we wake up, eat breakfast, run, eat, nap, run, sleep.
That's it. It's just when you get to 80 the ratio is different, because for every hour's running you need at least an hour's sleep. So I always say an hour's run takes 2 hours these days.
I like that ratio. I wish I could do it.
But yes, things have been pretty good in New Zealand, and yesterday for the first time in 2 months there were no reported new cases and no deaths, which doesn't mean the thing is beaten. It's not going to be beaten that easy, but it's
right.
But we made real progress, and that's a very good milestone.
That's a good sign. I think New Zealand and Australia are pretty neck and neck about becoming the first countries to come out of this thing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we're beginning to talk about that, but from the exercise point of view, that's been more than tolerated. In fact, on Sunday, I ran this virtual 10K down on the waterfront, and a friend who is a regular official, she was second master in the Boston Marathon a few years ago, called Gabby O'Rourke.
Oh, wow.
And she was out there in her car because it was a very windy day. As I came to the turnaround, I saw a couple of cops talking to her. And I thought, oh dear, they've decided we're an event. They've seen her with a stopwatch, and they decided we're in trouble. But as I came by, they cheered me by, because she'd been telling them that I was racing against these two guys in America, which I was. in live time. They were running in Newport, New York, and I was running in Wellington, New Zealand. And we started at exactly the same moment, coordinated by cell phone. And
Okay.
the cops really got into this because they wanted me to beat the Americans, and so so they encouraged us through. So yeah, there've been good moments, and we can get out and about, and I've been able to shape and fine tune a training program better than since I was a student.
Yeah, well, you have the time now, probably.
You have the focus more than anything, and no social life and no theaters, and
Yep.
so you don't have to get everything done by 5 o'clock because you're going out to dinner or anything like that. You've got the whole day to plan.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not all bad. I mean, it's serious, and not to make a joke of it, but it's not all bad.
That's true. That's true. I think some people are starting to enjoy the simple things again in life. I see so many more people outside walking with their families that I didn't even know existed in my neighborhood. And now I see them walking by my house every day. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And again, in this Podium Runner article, I wrote about the pleasures of running alone.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy my friends, and that's a major part of the pleasure of running for me. But now we're having to run alone because you can't get anybody from a different bubble, as they're calling it in New Zealand. I don't know if you have the same sort of system there. And you gain a lot from running alone. You take in the environment much more. You enjoy the wildlife, the birds, and the ground.
Yeah.
I've always loved the interaction with the earth. That's always been a major pleasure for me. And doing that again on the bush trails and on grass fields and focusing on that running alone is great.
Yeah, people in the States here have really flocked to the trails these days. As a runner, you're out there. Usually you are alone, but there's a lot of people on the trails these days. People are
the same has happened here.
Yeah.
There's a lot more families out, and which is why I've actually been avoiding the bush tracks, which are narrow,
Mm-hmm.
so you can't get distance when you're passing people. You just
Right.
kind of take a deep. It's actually quite funny. I don't know if you have this. That when you meet people these days on the bush track, you get this strange mixture of a friendly greeting and a look of deep suspicion.
Yes. Yeah.
we all understand it, but you get this kind of double feeling.
Right. Well, there's like a 50-50 chance that the person's okay with you going near or not. It depends. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So you pull your shirt up, or I take a deep breath because I can hold my breath for a good while.
It's going to be weird. That's what I keep thinking. Like, all right, when can I shake people's hand again? Because I'm a handshaker and hugger. Like when I see people, I give them a hug and shake their hands, and I'm gonna maybe need to have name tags or something that says whether you can accept a hug or not.
That's true. Yeah. Well, when I was setting up this little virtual race that we had on Sunday, there were actually 3 guys in America this time. The 2 were joined by another who is a great hugger.
Yep.
And I emailed them and I said, look, Marty, don't hug, to keep social distance, because I was getting quite serious. I said, I don't want to be responsible for a tragedy, just to
Right.
organize a little fun, piece of virtual silliness between 4 old blokes.
Right. All right. Keep your name out of it. Well.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, you were running your virtual race the same time that Gene Dykes was running his against Emily yesterday. And
I heard about that. That's impressive.
1918. He ran a 1918 5K yesterday at 72 years old. That's
good. They used to get some really good over 70 times at the Syracuse Festival of Races, which was the US Masters 5K Championship. I went there a few times, and I think when I was in my mid 70s, I was running 23.
Okay.
But Gene's performance is up above that.
Right. Well, as far as masters go, you set the masters record at Boston, correct? And at 218.
Yes, I did.
218. Yes. How old were you? 40?
No. Boston was 220.15.
220.15.
My best was 218, which I did at age 41 in Vancouver.
Gotcha.
Great marathon.
Okay.
The Boston one was I was 44 by then.
Okay.
And that was a 220.15.
Wow. And that was the record. And is it still stand today?
Oh no. The way I like to say, we all have to claim credit in some way. I was the last amateur to hold that record. Because after that was 1984, and after that they they
Yep.
brought in big money for the mouse. You know, I got a slightly wobbly unicorn on a plinth.
Right.
And the next year they got $10,000, and so they began to bring in the people who were running full time. And John Campbell, a New Zealander, John Campbell, who was a good friend for some years. I mean, he cleaned up that record and ran something like a 2:11.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So it's mine was not in that kind of class, but I hang on by claiming to have been the last amateur to win the Masters.
It's still in the record books.
Yes,
Wow.
yes. It was still, well, a win is a win, and it was a day that year, 84. It wasn't quite as bad as 2018, but it was in the same class.
Yeah.
It was one
Yeah,
of the worst 4 or 5 years ever.
yeah, we had Jeff Smith on a couple weeks ago. The
Yeah,
winner.
he won that day.
Yeah, Jeff won it. And then we actually just had Rob Costello on last week, the first professional to actually win.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah.
Yes, well, they're both good. They're both good friends.
Yeah, yeah, super nice guys. Rob's foundation
Yes.
is unbelievable. The work that he does for his community is tremendous. He's a really
Yes,
nice
I
guy.
know. He's really great. Though I've got a great grudge against Rob de Castella, which is that I was never a really brilliant relay runner. Of course, I've always been better running in a group than running alone. But one time we had the New Zealand National Road Relay, and I ran one of my best legs ever. And I actually cleaned up most of the top, all the top New Zealanders that day, and took fastest time until I heard there was a guest team from Melbourne, Australia, called Glenn Huntley. And I heard that on that lap, an 18 or 19-year-old called Rob de Castella had run something like 20 seconds faster than I did. So you know, I've always held that deep grudge against Rob.
That's funny. That was the first time you heard about him, huh?
Well, I'd seen him before, because when he was about 16, he came over to New Zealand and ran a track race, and I was doing the stadium announcing, which is another of my jobs. So yeah, so the name was familiar, but so I grumble at him whenever I see him these days.
Nice.
Lifetime supply of beer he owes me.
That's what he was joking about the night before that he ran the race in Boston. He had a beer, and the sponsors were upset with him because they didn't think he was taking it seriously. He's like, I'm Australian. That's what we do.
He's Australian, of course.
Yeah. But the other record you set in New York, correct? You won the Masters in New York as a 50-year-old.
Yes. I won as a 40-year-old. That was actually my first ever marathon. I hadn't run marathons before that, because people these days would not realize that back then in the 1960s and 70s, when I was kind of running at my peak, the marathon wasn't the big deal that it became.
Right.
It was America, kind of inspired by Frank Shorter, that made the marathon central. You know, before that, I always say the way when you met another runner, you know, like you and I would just meet each other, and the way you would identify yourselves would be to say, what's your best placing in the national cross country?
Right.
You know,
that was the only race.
9th or 58th or something.
Yep.
After 1970, about 75, 76 somewhere, that currency changed and it became, what's your best marathon time? And that was an important change in the nature of running. And that's when the New York Marathon was building up.
Yeah.
And so I never ran one. Because I ran cross country. That was my prime interest. Ran cross country for England and for New Zealand. Ran track 10Ks. Ran road up to say 10 miles.
Yep.
There was no such thing as a half marathon. Nobody ever heard of such a thing. That was a kind of spin-off of the popularity of the marathon.
Right.
And then I was in America. I was on research and study leave in 1980. And everybody was talking about marathon. And I thought, well, I better do one. And so I got myself into New York and ran my debut marathon there.
Wow. Do you ever think like, oh, if you did this when you were 25, what would have happened, you know, as a marathon runner?
Yes, I do, because my best was 2:18 at 41. And obviously there'd been some fall off. But the other side of it is, if I'd been training and racing marathons through my 20s and 30s, I might not have lasted as I did.
Right.
You know, that's the body pays a lot, I think, for that distance and for racing at that distance.
Right. Takes a
So,
bit of
so,
beating, yeah.
so who knows? You know, it's like saying, well, how it would have been if there'd been big prize money available for masters a year or two earlier. Than there's no point. You know, you do it because you
Yep.
love it, and you take the best from it from that particular era.
Well, yeah, you just trying to coordinate the calls with you every day. It seems like you're out there running. It's like you're.
Well, yes, yes, oh yes, I'm still running every day. Well, not quite. I didn't run yesterday because
You had your
I
race.
tried. I went out. Kathrine was running, and I went out and tried. My legs let me know that they were on strike. Of course, I'd
Okay.
had this hard race the day before, and they were not doing anything yesterday.
Right.
So
And
they have a mind of their own, and they protested very strongly.
and then we were chatting about our virtual race that we just announced yesterday, and you're going to join us, I think, the 5K challenge, where it's the champions of Boston Buddies.
I think I don't want to get too serious, Vince, but in this crisis, these virtual races are really important, I think, because if we can keep doing something creative in running, you know, it's what running has always been good at. The term I used in my book, and I was writing about the running boom, the term I like to use is creative energy.
Yep.
Running is extraordinary for that creative energy, for the way people who were training 100 miles a week suddenly had an idea. Oh, I think we should have a race in our community, and they'd start it, and they'd do that, or they'd start a chain of shoe stores, or they'd start a travel business like Tom Gilligan, or what. Yep. It was just an amazing period of explosive energy.
Yep.
And we need to look and say, how are we going to respond to this crisis, and what can we do that's good for us as a community, and therefore good for society as a whole. And virtual racing is one way that we've got to do it at the minute.
Yeah.
And that's also going to help. You know, I feel really sorry for the race organizers, especially the smaller ones, you know, who are often, you know, local guys who put on a race in their community, and many of them are going to be deeply out of pocket this year out of their own money, because they've got their garages full of medals and t-shirts that nobody wants.
Exactly.
So if they can ask us to keep our entry fee with them and just do it virtually, that's really going to help to keep the sport going.
Yeah. If we want them to be back, we should support them. Yeah.
I think so. I think we want to try and keep it alive, as well as interacting with each other and having fun, and you can have some sense of a race. What I like to do, what I've done with the two that I've done here against friends in America, is we've run at exactly the same time. So we've coordinated by cell phone, and we've decided we started on Sunday at 8 o'clock in the morning, New Zealand time, 8 o'clock Sunday morning. Well, that was 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon in New York State. And we started exactly the same moment. So we were racing against each other, even though we couldn't see each other. And when I saw those cops that I was telling you about, I said, I just called as I did the turnaround. I said, I'm racing two guys in America, and we're socially distanced.
Can't be much more distant than that.
I'm happy to support whatever virtual races I can.
It's all free, and for those that haven't heard about it yet, we were gonna do like an NCAA basketball type tournament where you get 64 people and you go head to head in your first round. So there's 32 matches the first round, then 16, then 8, then 4, then 2, then you're done. So we've got 95 people that signed up. So we got to figure this out. We'll probably get 128 at least, and then it's winner take all. There's nothing but pride, but I'm gonna get a trophy made, and then the winner's name will get engraved on the trophy with the year. And if we do it again next year, you got to mail that trophy to the winner of the next year.
Oh, that's good. Or what you can do, what my friend Dennis Moore did in New York this week, he made virtual medals.
Okay.
And we've all received our virtual medal.
Nice.
And I made sure that everybody won. Everybody that took part actually won a category.
Okay.
You know, we got one guy who ran, and he's in his late 60s, so he won the youth division. because the rest of us are all over 70 or 80. So he got a medal. He got a virtual online medal. Very nicely done. I mean, Dennis must know how to do the photoshopping or whatever it is. But
right. No, that's great.
He designed a virtual T-shirt as well.
We haven't. We've designed real ones, but not a virtual one.
Well, he designed a virtual one. So if you've got
Okay.
real ones, if anybody's got real ones to use up, then
Yeah,
use them up and sell them to people.
yeah. Let me show you. We did this. We did just have a virtual race,
Oh yes.
the
Uh-huh.
Lovely Mile. So yeah, then we got medals made up for them and everything. We did it basically the weekend of the Boston Marathon, because obviously
Yeah,
we weren't racing, but
to
we
replace that.
did, and you could run any distance. All you needed to do was run your last mile your fastest. That was like the goal.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was for
Yeah.
charity. We raised a good amount of money for charity, so it was fun. That's just it.
Well,
We'll figure it out. You
yeah,
know,
if
we're
you can
still having
figure out
fun.
to make it as near to a race as possible. I mean, that's what I
Yeah.
liked about doing it, what I called in live time,
Hmm.
was that I knew that there they were on the start line at exactly the same time that I was, and we'd warmed up at the same time, and we'd pooped at the
Right.
same time. No, all of the usual things that you do. And then, of course, as soon as it was over, we got on the phone to each other and we all boasted and made excuses and complained about our injuries and all the things that runners always do. So,
I love it.
so it kind of kept the community going.
Right, right. That's just it. We're still, even though we're separate physically, we're still together socially. We're not
Well,
socially distant.
that's what I
We're
think
just-
we can do, and
Yeah.
and as you know, and just veering back to my book, one of the themes of my book, When Running Made History, and that's why it's called that. It is partly the history of running,
Mhm.
but that's not the main thing. The main thing is when it occurred to me that running has become something much more significant than just a sport,
Yep.
and has earned itself a place in society, which is completely unprecedented. Because so
Mhm.
now, if something really major happens, you get a disaster like the Christchurch earthquake, for instance, then a run will be the way that the community comes together. One of the classic cases is the New York Marathon after 9/11.
Yep.
And that's one of my chapters. And that marathon was so important for
Mhm.
New York and for America and for the world to kind of recover from that catastrophe and make
Yep.
all kinds of statements about community and positiveness and health and all and gender equity and all those other things that were under threat at that time.
Yep.
Um, so at this time, we're in another catastrophe now. It's a hard one to get hold of because there isn't an enemy that you can shoot.
No. And
That's
this is
what
the
people
first one that is
need to put their heads
worldwide.
around. It's just this little virus, and you can't see it, and
Yeah.
you don't quite know how to deal with it. So it's not an easy catastrophe to think your way through and to take
Yep.
sides on. But we need to, running is something which is so positive and so health oriented that I think we have a contribution to make. We haven't quite figured out how to do it, but if we can just keep working together on these virtual runs, we're doing something very important, I think.
I agree. I think those virtual ones give people something to look forward to when they do it. It still gives them the excitement of a race, and you
Yeah,
still get to call your friend and boast, like you just said.
exactly, exactly. And then the next day you feel completely stuffed, like I do today.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's interesting, like going through your book and stuff. I mean, you don't really realize how much the running has been around during certain times. Like if you think of 1990 Berlin with the wall coming down, and
Yeah.
Berlin Marathon right there, like, and running into Brandenburg Gate, and like right around all that same time. Like,
Yes, that was, in a way, that was the chapter where the book started. I
mhm,
was working on a history of modern running, which somebody needs to do. It's a really important subject because the running movement is really important in modern society.
mhm,
You've got to put 40,000 people on the streets in New York, and it's unique.
yeah.
Um, well, and if I can just curl back from that, one thought at the moment, one of the things I keep saying in the book is that one thing that makes running unique in terms of its numbers is that it's a participant activity.
Yeah.
It's not like rock concerts or football or baseball, which are spectator activities. That's running is
Yeah.
unique. And that's been our great strength. Right now, because of this horrible little virus, that's our great problem, is that we all want to jam together tens
Right.
of thousands of people, and we can't do that. And so that's
Mhm.
what we've got to somehow think our way around and adjust. And
Right.
we haven't solved it yet, but people are beginning. Good people like Tony Rivers is doing columns about this, and good people are beginning to think their way through and offer solutions, and we'll get there. But yes, just going back, the book started really when Kathrine and I ran in the Berlin Marathon in 1990, and that of course was such a seminal time in history, with the wall coming down and the sense of freedom and the sense of new frontiers. And I realized that the marathon was actually, arguably more important than the day of German reunification itself, which was much more low key. The marathon is a really important expression and symbol of what was going on. And doing that, I thought this isn't just a race, there's something much more important going on here. And that gave me the idea then, when I came to this book, I incorporated that piece of writing and then extended it and wrote about London after World War II and
1948.
New York after 9/11 and the Boston bombings. And it's not all disasters, because there are very positive ones as well. Like the way running and track and field can bring a community together when you put on a major games, like in Christchurch in 1974. So there's those chapters. But it's going beyond just the sport and into the contribution that running makes to our modern society.
Right, and that's where the title is. I mean, basically, when running made history. It truly, you truly do go through the history. Like it's not the history of running, but it's history alongside with running.
Yes, it is. It's really, I like to say, it's really 3 books at once. It's the history of modern running, which it started as, and to solve the problem of that, I put in those timelines at the back, and people don't notice those very much, but there's a lot of research in those, just kind of done very quietly. But there's timelines of the running boom and of women's running and of masters running. And they have stuff that has never been put, and future historians can go to that, and they can use those as kind of like a skeleton for the books that need to be written. So there's that book, and then there's the book we just talked about, which is how running is more significant and has helped the environment. For instance, that's one chapter, and is helping with society remaking its views of old age, which is one obviously that I feel strongly about at the moment.
It's just a number.
And then the third book is a more personal one, and it's not my life story. It's not about me, but it's about me as observer. It's about what I've seen in a lifetime in running.
Right.
And again, it occurred to me that perhaps because of the temperament I have, I've had a lot of different roles. And so the book starts with me as a little 8-year-old boy watching the great runners and reacting to those. And then it comes through my student days, and again as a spectator. And then I become a runner. And so then you get chapters written from the point of view of an elite runner. And then I became stadium announcer at major things like the Commonwealth Games, and then a television announcer. And I've always been a journalist, but that became because I've always written about running for whatever newspapers are available. But that became more prominent, and so now I'm writing for Runner's World and Podium Runner, and some of those chapters towards the end of the book are for when I was at the Boston Marathon and the New York Marathon, there to cover it for Running Times, Runner's World. So it's got that whole range, and I like to say, well, if nothing else, nobody has ever written before about a major game seen through the eyes of the stadium announcer.
Probably not. That's true. Yeah, it's a different take. Yeah,
and the particular problems you have, and the stresses of that job, and and if we're talking hard, by the way, if you ever complain about stadium announcers making mistakes, they're doing the hardest job in the world. Because you're trying, in a track and field meet, you're trying to keep track of 5 or 6 high-level events at the same time.
And get the names right, and
well, but it's a simultaneity of it. It's there's the mile or the 800 meters is going on, but there's some guy who's might throw a world record discus in the middle of it, and you've got to tell the crowd to look at him.
Right.
Nobody telling him afterwards. They're there to see things. So you don't say, "Oh, by the way, you just missed a world record high jump." So that is a really good. It's a really tough job. I've phased myself out. Finally, after doing it for 45 years, I'm just about phased myself out of doing it now.
I'm realizing how tough it is to do things live as I do these interviews.
Absolutely, yes, because I keep interrupting you.
No. Just there's other there's people asking questions. We do have a comment from one of our listeners, Lisa Studer. She says, "I have a signed copy of your book, and my son was very excited to meet you and have his picture taken with you at the Bay State Expo." So
I remember
Lisa,
them.
do you? Okay.
Yeah,
Your little guy's a really fast runner.
Yes, I remember them coming up after the talk. Yeah, there was a family, and yes, it's great when you see the kids, because we all remember ourselves as a kid, and in the book I put in those days we used to collect autographs. These days you get selfies with great sports people. But those days you get, and I've got these autographs of these great athletes, and I've still got them, and I put them in the book because they were so important to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, if you go to Disney, you can still get the autographs of all the characters. That's what my daughter does.
Oh, is that right? Yes.
Now, you briefly mentioned, your childhood, and did you used to see Roger Bannister practice?
Yes. Mm.
What was that like?
Well, he was about best part of 10 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So he was an established athlete, young international athlete. At the time, I was kind of early teens, and so just getting interested in running. So I became a bit of a fan. And I lived, as I say in the book, we lived in the London suburbs near to the London University track, which is about 10 miles out of London itself.
Okay.
And a lot of the top athletes used to come there to train. And that's where I got my first hero, who was called Arthur Wint. Okay. And he was a great, I think, Jamaican, but he was at London University at that time, and so running for a club called Polytechnic. And he would train there, and I went out one. He was a big, huge guy, and very nice. And I went out one time. I stole my mother's tape measure and measured his stride, because he had this huge stride, and found it was a 9-foot stride. Because you've got the cinder mark. You see, these days, sorry, I should have explained. In those days, tracks were cinder. So the spikes left marks in the track.
Right. Wow, 9 feet. I can't imagine.
You couldn't do that now. Yeah, he got an Olympic silver medal, and I think a gold medal in the 400 4x4 relay. So
okay.
So I used to go along there, and so sorry, you asked about Roger Bannister. And Bannister didn't train there regularly. He mostly trained at the Paddington track, which was some way from us. But he would come out to Motspur Park sometimes and do time trials. And I saw him do a time trial over 3/4 of a mile. And it was the end of the summer, I think, before he did the 4-minute mile. And I think if I remember rightly now, it's in the book, he broke 3 minutes, I think, for the 3/4.
Of course.
so we thought, okay, he's about 256 or something. So he's getting close. So I didn't know him ever well. I met him a few times later.
Okay. But you knew who he was when you were watching him.
Oh, very much so. And in later life, well, on the night of the first 4 minutes, just after that, it was my birthday, and my parents gave me a tabby kitten, because I'd always wanted a cat, and so I called this cat Bannister.
Okay. After him. Nice.
Of course, because he just broke in 4 minutes. So later in life, when I finally met him, I told him I'd named a cat after him, and he didn't seem nearly as impressed as I thought he should be.
He wasn't flattered that a cat was named after him.
It didn't seem to make a big impact on him.
So we have another question from the audience here. So Warren Monk, he says, Vince, ask Roger about the Polytechnic Marathon. You know about that marathon? Oh
yes. In fact, I've been researching that a little bit recently, because I'm working on the next book.
Okay.
And one chapter of that is, and that's going to be more. It's going to be more of a book of running history, but the best stories in running, not a complete history, because that's been done pretty well.
Yep.
by several different people, but I've picked the kind of the best stories, and one of them is the 1908 Olympic Marathon. So yes, and what tell Warren Monk, I follow his Facebook stuff assiduously, and including all his fascinating statistics about the coronavirus.
Oh, I see him.
So I know who Warren Monk is. So what happened was the 1908 Olympics were originally going to be in Italy, and then the Vesuvius or Etna. There was a major, I think it was Vesuvius, had a major explosion, volcanic eruption, and that devastated Italy and the Italian economy, and so they withdrew. And so at short notice, the Brits moved in and said they would put on the 1908 Olympics. And a club called Polytechnic, which was the club of basically of London University, they took on the organizing of it, and they were the ones who devised the course, starting in the grounds of Windsor Castle and ending at the Olympic Stadium in Chiswick at the White City. And that's where we got the extraordinary distance of 26 miles, 385 yards.
They extended
the marathon. And I've done a lot of work on exactly where they started, and which I won't bother you with, because but that was the course, and it was estimated at they estimated as 26 miles from the start to the stadium, and then going round the track, and it had to end opposite the Royal stand in the grounds, and the track was, what people don't realize often, the track was roughly 3 laps to the mile. It was a 500-yard track, so because the Brits weren't going to go metric. That's like the Europeans, they resisted the whole metric movement. So they did their own 500-something yard track. So it was round to the Royal Box was about half a lap, and that was the 385 yards. And then the Polytechnic Marathon, they ran it again the next year, and it became the world's greatest marathon for a number of years, and probably that and Boston were the two major races all through. And of course, in those days, you didn't cross the Atlantic very much, and so they operated, as it were, in separate worlds. And the other connection with the Poly, as we called it, was that one year, 1963, it was run in June, and I was about 24, and right into running seriously, and I took some time off. I didn't think my local club had a week off or something, and I took myself along to Chiswick Stadium, and I saw this American runner resident in Britain, who we called our Yank. He was doing some school teaching, and he'd come over to England to enjoy the running culture there, and he broke the world record in the Polytechnic Marathon, called Buddy Edlin. And that's one of the chapters in my book, is kind of the forgotten Buddy Edlin, and how he made history he was really, you couldn't call him the founder of the American running boom, but he was absolutely the precursor, and a really important figure in American running history, who kind of gets forgotten.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Because Frank won the Olympics, and by the time Buddy got to the Olympics, I tell the story, he actually went to the 64 Olympics with a faster time than a baby Bikila. But by then he'd begun to get sciatica. He'd really beat himself up winning the Yankee, the Yonkers Marathon in very hot weather. And it was an incredibly courageous run that he did to get 6th in the Olympics, but he didn't get a medal. And so he's kind of the great forgotten hero of American running. So I did a chapter about him, because again, everything in that book I actually saw personally. I saw Zatopek run in 48, and I saw Buddy Edlin come into the stadium. In his white t-shirt, this grotty, scruffy old stadium with only about 200 people there, and break the world record.
That's amazing. Yeah.
If
I could go, if there was one thing I could ask, if I could go back to 1908, rather than them lengthen the course, they should have just moved the start line so that it was still 24 miles. I would have broken 3 hours a lot earlier in my life.
Yes, I'm with you. I'm with you. And I always say, blame the royal family. You know,
Right.
because they wanted to start it in the grounds of Windsor Castle, and there's a photograph I've seen of the whole family out there, all these posh kids in their beautiful dresses and boys in little sailor suits, and
Right.
they all went and became king this and king that.
Right.
I'm not a great royalist, but so I like to blame the royal family for those.
Right. So we have another comment here. A lot of people have met you apparently. So Susan Kuntz, she says, I met you as well at Marine Corps with my Women's March shirt on. Have your book and gave a copy to my nephew who had just started running. She just reread 1960s Rome chapter, and at your encouragement, watched the YouTube video with Bikila Win and your line, I saw the moment. Fame.
Yeah, yes. Well, one of the great pleasures of having a book to sell. I mean, the actual selling of it isn't a lot of fun. You know, I'd much rather just give it away. But you meet if you go to expos, you meet so many interesting people.
Yeah.
And you really get a sense of what the running movement consists of. You know, the real people who make it all up. And so I always enjoy doing that. And I remember her Women's March T-shirt, and commended her on it.
Wow, you've got a good memory.
Yeah, well, I don't remember. I'm not such a memory as Kathrine has. I mean, she's incredible. She's like an elephant. Remembers absolutely everybody she's ever met. I can't quite do that, but I do actually remember that one. And yes, and that chapter, that was I kind of set myself a literary challenge, you know, as a writer. Because it was eyewitness, but I was out on the course in the dark, because the marathon started late, you know, early evening, and then it got dark, and the last 15 miles of the race were run in the dark, and it was lit by Italian soldiers holding flares on the top of long poles, kind of flaming torches. So what I tried to get the sense of the chiaroscuro, you know, the light and shade, and you couldn't really see the runners. You saw them run into a pool of light and then out again into the darkness, and then into light and out again. So I only saw Bikila and Radi go by for about 2 seconds. Okay. So that was my literary challenge, was to describe something. That's why that was just that glimpse. And to build,
you only saw for 2 seconds.
To build a whole, well, that's what it's like being a marathon spectator, you know.
Right.
To build a whole chapter,
describing it just there.
Yes, but to build the chapter on that, and you know, I told his life story, and I told the story of the race, and built the chapter around that one authentic moment. And I still believe that was the moment when he put the first break on Radi, because actually a gap just opened just at that point. So, you know, maybe I got lucky, or maybe I'm just imagining it, but I believe I saw the moment. So that again was a literary one. That, you know, I had the challenge of writing through the eyes of a 19-year-old boy, sorry, a 9-year-old boy,
right,
in London, 1948, and how that seemed to a little boy. You know, I tried to catch that, and it goes through that one. There's that glimpse, and there's another chapter at a nighttime meet in London when Chris Chataway, the Englishman, beat Kutz, the Russian, and that's the Cold War chapter. And I call that my film noir chapter, because it's like 1950s, you know, Humphrey Bogart movies, where everything's in the dark, and I try to get this atmosphere where this is 1954. There were no lights on the stadium. Right. They had wartime searchlights mounted up at the top of the stand, and they followed the runners around the track with these 2 searchlights. And of course, they kept missing them. The runners would run out of the pool of light, and then the searchlight would follow. I tried to get the atmosphere of that.
Right.
And then it goes right through to the last chapter. I was 78, and it was me looking at the Syracuse Festival of Races, and seeing these astonishing performances by you know, an 80-year-old woman running a 5K in 25 minutes, for instance.
That's amazing.
Libby James, and just these. So the book is this series of kind of my eyewitness at different stages, and as a writer, I'm trying to get the the different points of view and bring them to life.
Yeah. We can make a movie out of it.
Well, if you could do that, because it's got so many different points of view, you'd
Right.
need.
You get a person who ages through their life and see.
Well, that would be all right. Yes.
Well, you were part of John Dunham, a Boston buddy, and you have a connection with John Dunham and Spirit of Marathon too, right?
Oh, very strongly. We got to know John. I say we, and Kathrine and me in this case.
Mm-hmm.
I think originally he was hanging around at Rich Benio's event, the Napa Valley Marathon, kind of looking for help and looking for sponsorship for this idea he had to make a film about a marathon. Maybe it was in Chicago, but anyway, we put him in contact with different people, mostly unsuccessfully. And then eventually he got a much better reception from the Chicago Marathon, mm-hmm. and made the first in that series of films, Spirit of the Marathon.
Yep.
And I mean, he's a terrific filmmaker.
Yep.
He had that wonderful idea that's never been done before of getting permission from the race and mounting cameras on the back of kind of bicycle trolleys. Mm-hmm. So you've got a guy on a bike, and then the camera's on the back. So the camera is right in the race. Yep. Now, normally we're used to seeing races from the outside. You can get a motorcycle alongside the elites, but you're never going to see the back of the pack people.
Right.
Not in that way. You're only going to see them from up above or something. So Dunham got right in there. And so you're right in people's faces, and just ordinary runners suffering through the last 6 miles. So it's a brilliant piece of filmmaking.
Yeah. Both.
So I was the historian for that, and then I was the historian for Spirit of the Marathon 2, mm-hmm. which is set in the Rome Marathon, and then probably the best of them is the Boston one, yes. Which again is a wonderful piece of filmmaking.
Yep, I watch it all the time. It's a great. We actually had John and Tom on a couple of weeks ago.
Oh yeah, you would. Yes.
Yeah. They both were on. They had a private screening for us 2 years ago of the Boston documentary. It's just he did a really nice job of explaining the whole history of the marathon. Tom has that book which basically has every single Boston marathon. Yep, you must have it. There you go. Yep.
Within hand's reach.
Right. And they had
it's one of the key books.
He said they have thousands of hours of footage for that movie, and they obviously had to cut it down to 2 hours or so. But he said, they didn't even put Duel in the Sun in there. Like, there was that much footage. Mm-hmm. There's so many other stories that he has to tell. He'd probably do a sequel to it, and would have plenty of extra. Yeah. As well.
And then of course, like now, history itself intruded, and security and yep. The whole post-bombing thing became so important.
Yep. That's right.
So it centered on Dave McGillivray and the cops and all of that, and that was right and proper to do that. But it was a great piece of filmmaking, and the way he intercuts the history with the immediate stories.
Correct.
I think one of his absolute best sequences, a really heartbreaking sequence, is in the first one, the Chicago Spirit of the Marathon, when he has one of his main figures was John Ngenga, the mm-hmm. Kenyan, who finished second about 3 times at Chicago. Mm-hmm. And the camera went back to his home in Kenya, and he got back there just as his brother's house had been burned and I forget whether his brother's wife murdered by people who really wanted to get at John Ngenga's money.
Yeah.
And it was an absolutely heartbreaking story. And he got the camera, right in there.
Yeah, you don't hear about these things in the normal news. Yeah, he has a different. He tells a story a great way and gives you a different.
Yes, he does. Yes, very good. But could I just talk on that, because one chapter that I often forget to talk about in the book but I was really very pleased with was the chapter about the African phenomenon, mm-hmm. because what I did with that was I took a completely different approach to what anybody else has ever done. And I didn't look at why are they so great, how do they train, altitude, all of that. The editors maybe put in a little section about that, but I'm no scientist, and so that was just a kind of a dutiful description. But what I was interested in was how we as a culture have received them, how we've responded to this absolutely unprecedented phenomenon where you've got a major international sport like running, and all of a sudden, out of the 300 best people in the world at that sport, 297 of them come from the same little dot on the globe. And the world has never encountered anything like that before. As I say in the book, Brazilians are good at playing soccer, and say Italians are good at singing, but you couldn't say that 297 of the 300 best singers are Italian. And we as a running as a culture has, I think it's to our real credit, the way we have received this, the way we've welcomed them and admired them and studied them and gone to their homes to see how they live. And every running journalist you meet at the marathons has been to Kenya or Ethiopia. I can hardly think, I can't think of any, I think, serious professional running journalist who hasn't been there. Right. And some have learned the language, and some have got completely hooked, and some are right into it, and some have created charities. And we, our young people, our top young athletes now go there. And what I say in the book is, think how important that is, that they're going there not to tell the Africans to worship our religion or not to rip off their resources, but they're going there to learn from them, which is, it's like a kind of reverse imperialism. And again, it's something which I think is really important that's happened in running, and that people don't, in a way, we just take it for granted, because basically, if anybody's good at running, we're going to like them and admire them for it.
Right. That's what we do.
That's what we do. Yes. I mean, that's why we welcome women. As soon as we found out that women could beat us, we really started welcoming and admiring them.
Yeah. Speaking of that,
that's great. I'll try and beat you next time.
Yeah. I mean, so you married the first woman to officially, run or have an official number in the Boston Marathon. Can you maybe just tell us a little bit about how you guys met?
There are two different versions of this. There's my version and her version.
Okay. Sounds like me and my wife.
and then there's also the cleanup version. But we were the two guest speakers at a marathon in Australia.
Okay.
In Canberra, Australia, which is the capital of Australia. It's the federal capital.
Okay.
And it's a city that was created to be the federal capital. There was nothing there before at all.
Okay.
And so it's a kind of artificial place full of, therefore, public servants, and regarded by the rest of Australia as incredibly boring. And so one of our lines when we give speeches in Australia is, I always say, because Kathrine and I met there, and we're therefore the only people in the world who think of Canberra as romantic. And the Australians all fall over laughing at that, because it's the last place. It's like saying Gary, Indiana is romantic, or right. Something.
No offense to anybody from Gary, Indiana.
So we were the two guest speakers.
Okay.
And so we met at dinner beforehand, and then I ran the race, and it was an unusual one because the men's race was sponsored by Nike, and I was getting some travel assistance from Nike at that time, because I was top master. And the women's race was an Avon race. So it was very unusual at the Avon race. And it was also, I think, the Australian National Championship. So that's why Kathrine came to be there.
Okay. She
came whirling in. The first thing I heard about her was the race director, Dave Cundy, who we now call Cupid. He came downstairs. He'd been to pick her up from the airport, and he said, "She's a high energizer." So those are the first words that I heard about. So anyway, we gave the speeches, and we liked each other's speeches, and that's where I'm going to finish the story.
That's where you're going to finish the story. Well, she was the original Energizer Bunny, I guess.
Yes, she was. She's incredible. But that's, again, I mean, just a couple of things about me as historian and writer, if you like.
Sure.
I had really supported women's running before I met Kathrine.
Okay.
I'm quite proud of the fact I was writing in New Zealand. I was living in Christchurch, and for the evening newspaper called the Christchurch Star, I was their athletics and Harrier correspondent. And I found out that in America there was a national marathon championship for women. That was 1974. And I wrote about it. I found out who these women were and Judy Eikenberry, who won it. And I put in a whole thing about women's running and how the best women runners were running fast enough to have qualified for the Canterbury team in the New Zealand chapter, to give an idea of how good they were. So that was 1974. So I was way ahead of meeting Kathrine and doing that. And then in the book, that was really my axis. You know, I said I was writing from different points of view in each chapter. I was a little boy, or I was a runner, or whatever. In the women's chapter, that's really my access to women's running. And so I talk about how I first saw Kathrine when I was watching the Avon Marathon in London. I was on research leave there. And I was looking for Lorraine Moller, the New Zealander who was a good friend. And Kathrine came by, the officials came by on a big red double-decker bus, open top bus, and Kathrine was up there. So I say that was the first glimpse I ever had of her. But obviously, knowing the whole Avon story enabled me to tell the story of women's running in an informed way. While at the same time, as always, I did my own research, and the significant thing about that chapter is that it's not dominated by the marathon in the way that, you know, Kathrine's story is, and most stories of women's running have become. I tell the story of how there were actually national and international championships in cross country for women in 1927 and 1931, and how in the little local club that I ran for in Guildford, England, we had a woman who was a Commonwealth medalist at the 800 meters. And so for me, for women to be running I just took it for granted. She was called Joy Jordan. Yeah, I mean, it was not something I ever thought of. You would, there weren't all that many of them, but they were completely welcome. And mostly in England at that time, they had their own federation, and so we didn't see much of them competitively. When I got to New Zealand, there was only the one federation, and suddenly the women were there at every event, and that was again a really good thing. Yeah. So I had more of a history. I mean, I've learned a lot through Kathrine, but I had a whole history independently of her as well.
Nice. Well, I appreciate your time today. We're running up against an hour. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but this was great. But before we go, let's just maybe recap. So, because you're the author of over 20 books, correct? But your latest is the When Running Made History.
Yes, a lot of them are literary books, editions of New Zealand poetry. My biggest book was the Oxford Companion to New Zealand Literature. Which is 500 odd pages and is an absolute basic reference work for New Zealand literature, which is a very rich literature. So anyway, so I've got that side because I was professor of English, and I've got that side, and there are editions of novels by Samuel Butler and Thomas Hardy and work like that. But then on running, my first book was called Heroes and Sparrows.
And can people get these things, get them on Amazon?
You can certainly get them on Amazon. Heroes and Sparrows was reprinted for the 25th anniversary.
And what's it about?
Again, if we got just very quickly.
Sure.
I'm proud of that book from one particular point of view. It was 1986 it was published. And it's called Heroes and Sparrows because it's a whole series of different articles about running, as it was at that time, at the early running boom. And I called it that because I'd quoted line by the poet Alexander Pope, who said, he's talking about God, and he said, God sees with equal eye, great God of all, a hero perish or a sparrow fall. And that's why it's called Heroes and Sparrows, because what I say in the book is running is a very unusual activity because the heroes and the sparrows are equal. And this is something in which it doesn't matter how good you are or how slow you are, you're part of the same community. The starting point was going to the funeral of a runner in Wellington, who was a very ordinary runner. And all the top runners in Wellington were there. And that gave me this vision that, you know, we respected him just as much as he would respect us. And
Right.
so it was not quite the first book. Joe Henderson was writing in this sort of way as well at that time, but it's one of the first books that actually said running is a big equal community, and that's something that's special about it.
Yeah, and this is 1986. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's a community of equals, some of whom are faster than others.
Right.
but that's still equals.
Right. Well, it's kind of like golf. We need like a handicap system or something.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we do in a way. We make our own handicap system, and everybody sets their own standards. And then the other book that was important was my running in literature, because that's the one that brought together my interest in running and my literary scholarship.
Okay.
And I'd been, over the years, every time I read something that referred to running, I would kind of cut it out, and so I compiled that book out of that, and it goes right back to ancient Greece and the Bible and Shakespeare, and right through to modern poets, Walt Whitman and James Joyce, and
right.
No, people had written about the literature of golf and the literature of baseball, and nobody had written about the literature of running, so I did it.
There you go. I feel like I'm getting smarter just talking to you. But again, I appreciate your time. For anybody that's listening, go onto Amazon. You just look up Roger Robinson's name, and you will see a slew of books come up. But When Running Made History is certainly the one that we talked about most today. And it really does. It's a great story of just all the different historical events that running happened to coincide with. And who knows, maybe you'll be writing about the Boston Marathon in September as the comeback race for 2020.
That's actually more than likely. That's what's next. We don't know what's next, but I think running will have a part in it.
Right. Well, what's next is the championship of Boston Buddies with our 5K virtual series.
Let's do it. Let's do it. And you didn't tell them that's age graded. That's really important for the likes of me.
It is age graded, yes. So it levels the playing field for everybody. Right?
Absolutely.
Right. And so hopefully you can join us. And then, I feel bad for the person that goes up against you, but it's luck of the draw.
Oh, age graded. No, it's all the same.
This was great. And thank you so much. I appreciate it. And hopefully we stay in touch. Maybe we can do this again, because I think you've got a lot of stories and a lot you could probably still share with the group. We'd love to have you back on the show.
Always happy to talk to and with runners and all those Boston folk and people I've met at different expos. Great to talk to you again. Yes. And see you around soon.
Yes. Hopefully we see you in September.
We hope so.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Vince. Thanks. Bye-bye.